Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have a good number to start our webinar today. Welcome to the Aspire Good Practice Reflection and Knowledge Sharing session. I've seen already in the chat that people have already started sending through their greetings. We have participants joining from Kenya, Tunisia, Nigeria, Uganda, and if I were to greet you in my language this morning, I would say Molweni, and that is the Xhosa language. And I invite you, even if you have not done so, use this opportunity to greet us in your language, tell us who you are and where you are joining from. There is already quite a lot of activity on the chat. I see Mr. Mwangi already spelling out Molweni. Thank you for joining, Karibu Sana. And thank you for joining our meeting this morning. We are going to start. I see participants from South Africa. You are welcome in this webinar today. So it is not a webinar and it is not official, our opening, until we have an official opening statement. And to do that for us, we have Ms. Unami Mpofu, who is the team lead of the Skills and Employability unit at AUDA. We welcome you, Ms. Unami. If you are ready, you can definitely take the floor and welcome us in today's webinar. Thank you.
Greetings. Thank you, Zippo. Thank you so much. In my language, I would say Salibonani, Ninjani, which is really to say, how are you all? Thank you so much for joining us from the African Union Development Agency. We are so pleased that we are able to have these webinars. But these webinars are really to tap into your expert knowledge. We, as the African Union Development Agency, our mandate is to provide technical advisory services to the member states. And we do this in various ways, but one of the tools that we have on hand is the development of knowledge products, such as learning briefs, policy briefs, which we then share widely through various networks to continue to influence the skills development ecosystem. And so on this occasion, we are really here to take a deep dive, a reflection into one of the products, one of the many products that we have developed for consumption. And we're really saying, how are you as the experts viewing some of the ideas that we have shared, some of the experiences that we have gathered from our best practices? And I invite you to come on to, of course, you've come onto this webinar, but I invite you to have a look through our Aspire, the African Skills Portal for Youth Employment and Entrepreneurship, which is really fast growing as a knowledge repository in the space of skills development. So without further ado, I would like to hand back over to Zippo, and I personally am excited and I'm looking forward to really hearing from you as we share today on this journey of partnerships for demand-driven skills development. Thank you, and a good morning again.
Thank you, Unami, for that warm welcome. And indeed, I think we were also excited. I didn't even introduce myself. I am Zippo Chapela, and I will be your host on today's webinar. Thank you very much for those words, and I hope that our participants are feeling welcome this morning. Welcome. I see some have already started to join us from Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, and Tunisia. Thank you for joining us. So before we jump into the program, just some webinar etiquette or housekeeping rules, and that is to remind us to keep our mics and our videos off during this session unless you will be speaking. And secondly, we do have interpretation available. We have it available in French, English, and in Portuguese. So it's quite easy to get to your interpretation. You just check on the bottom bar of your Zoom on the button that says interpretation, and you will find the language of your choosing, and you'll be able to follow the conversation in a language language that you prefer. And of course, if you are a part of the social media generation, feel free to tweet, Facebook and Instagram your comments and your quotes. And don't forget to tag the AUDA NEPED agency as well as AUC Education. So we are going to just go through our program before we jump in so that we all have an idea what our session will look like. We have already received our welcoming remarks from Ms. Unami, and thank you very much for that. And we are going to go straight into our panel, which is a spotlight or provides a spotlight to partnerships for demand-driven skills development. And we have 4 representatives from 4 institutions across the continent who will be sharing their experiences with us. And after those presentations, we'll have a short break for you to grab your coffee and your water and your tea to stay energized for the session. And this will be followed by some observations and insights that have been gathered through research for this particular topic, and GDI will be taking us through that. And after this, we will go into conversation, which is the most exciting part of this event because we really want to hear your voices and your reflections. So we will be looking forward to that. And then we will move into the launching of the handbook for Tvet managers for building demand-based partnerships, which is really exciting. And then, of course, we will wrap up the session and we will be done. So that is quite straightforward. We're looking forward to your participation and your inputs. As I mentioned, the chat is open. Please feel free to make your comments. We will have a question and answer session later for you to switch on your mics and speak. But please don't hesitate to use the chat as a means to communicate with us. So we're getting started, and I think it might be a bit important to provide a bit of a context in terms of the importance of the sharing of good practices before we go to our panel. So as you might have heard, Ms. Unami referred to Aspire, and perhaps some of us in the room are not so familiar with what Aspire is and how it relates to good practices. So I'm just going to provide that background so that we're all on the same page. Now, Aspire is the African Skills Portal for Youth Employment and Entrepreneurship. And this is a continental platform owned by the African Union and AUD NEPED. And through this platform, what we're doing is sharing knowledge and good practices about or in the area of Tvet, skills development and youth employment. So the audience that has joined us today, the Aspire platform is made for you. Now, one of the key offerings of Aspire is the sharing of good practices. And these good practices are really case studies and us capturing some stories of what institutions are doing across the continent to combat the challenge of youth unemployment, as well as the challenges related to it. And the purpose of doing this is to create a space for lesson sharing to ensure that other institutions across the continent can learn from the experiences of others and be able to change their policies and even their practice in order to have a more effective approach in their projects. So after we gathered these good practices, we all reached a point of asking ourselves, so what is next? We've gathered all these good practices, but what good do they do if they're just on a platform? And so we created this webinar and a series of webinars to allow us to really reflect on what is coming out from the good practices that we have gathered so that we can foster more knowledge sharing to even further influence policy and practice. So one of the key topics that we have identified, which comes across in most of the good practices we've gathered, is the issue of partnerships for demand-driven skills development. We all understand that there is a challenge in terms of a skills mismatch, that youth are being trained but are unable to find employment opportunities because their skills are not relevant for the market. And so this is a common challenge that we've picked up in all of the good practice institutions, where our practitioners are expressing the challenge of being able to build sustainable partnerships. So what we've done is we have brought today in this webinar some institutions that have done some great work in developing and forming partnerships in a way that is effective. So we have 4 institutions represented, and we are going to now move into a panel discussion where each of the representatives is going to explain to us and reflect to us their experiences on the ground. And so with that said, I will now introduce our first panelist, and he is Mr. Ashinafi Shiberu, who is the director responsible for planning, monitoring, evaluation, and communication. And he is working at Salam Tvet College in Ethiopia. Now, Mr. Ashinafi has a master's in social work and has quite extensive experience in working in government and in NGO institutions. We welcome you, Mr. Ashinafi. You have the floor to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zippo. Thank you, the ADA NEPAD, for giving us this chance to share our experience, to share the experience of Salam Tvet College from Ethiopia. I will try to do my presentation in short. Can you hear me, Zippo? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
So the title of my presentation is Connecting Major Stakeholders to Maximizing Employment of Users. So let me begin with the problem. As you well know, low rate of employability of TVT graduates is the major problem of TVT institutions here in Ethiopia, and I think it is a problem of the other African countries. So a large number of users graduate from vocational training institutions here in Ethiopia each year. But the main problem is they do not get employed immediately after graduation. Many of them do not get employed. So the dependency, the poverty cycles continues. Surprisingly enough, employers, on the other hand, complaining that they are not getting skilled labor force easily as per their demand with required skills and quantity. So this showed us there is a big gap between the job seeker and the employer, or the graduates and the industries. Why is this gap? What is the major contributing factor, the factors that contribute for this gap? We have identified that there is a lack of labor market linkage and intermediation. What does it mean? Most of the institutions, or hardly any institutions, actively connect the graduates with the employers, with industries and companies. Or the graduates are given no support from the Tvet institutions in finding jobs, in job mediation. So these graduates, the youth, the Tvet graduates, the job seekers, they do have a limited information about employer industries and companies. The employers, on the other hand, they do not have ample information on where to get the skilled personnel as per their demand of skill types, the requirements, and level of specialization. Even for those who prefers to be self-employed or to start their small business, the graduates have limited information on how to access the finance to engage in a small business. So all these problems creates the gap between the employers and between the job seekers and the employers, so that the youth do not get employed immediately after graduation. So Salam Tvet College tried to implement a new intervention called Job Business Service to address the problem of the labor market linkage and the intermediation. The Job and Business Service, JBS, main function is connecting or linking all these major stakeholders. Who are these major stakeholders? In the case of Ethiopia, the Tvet College, the training graduates, the industries and the companies, meaning the employers, the microfinance institutions who are giving a seed money or a small amount of business, a small amount of money to start the business for the users, and the government facilitators. So these 5 major actors do their jobs independently. They do not know each other. They do not share information. They do not share experience. So there is a big gap among these major stakeholders. These are the major stakeholders, as I said: the Tvet College, the Tvet graduates, the industries or companies, the employers, the microfinance institutions, and the government offices, government facilitators. So the JBS service, the JBS service officers connect all these stakeholders or major actors to enhance the employability of the users. What do they do? The job officers, the job business service officers organize stakeholders database, or they do mapping. Where are these stakeholders? What do they do? What kind of information do they need? What kind of skills do they need? Or what kind of skills do they produce? And undertake continuous assessment and gather relevant information from each stakeholder, not only gathering the relevant information, but they analyze this information and disseminate among each stakeholder. So they begin to know each other, what their responsibility, what do they have at hand, So how do they help the graduates? So how do they get the technical skills as per their requirements? So they do get all these informations. So the job officers also create a network among these stakeholders and organize information exchange platforms. What kind of platforms? Like stakeholders meetings, exhibitions, job fairs. So all these stakeholders come together and discuss the issue of the employment, the skill type, the level of skills. So they bridge the gap. And through this JBS office, through this JBS service, the JBS officers, they connect the graduates with employers, with microfinance institutions, with government facilitators. And they provide support to graduates in finding jobs. How? For instance, for wage employment, for those seeking to go to wage employment, they help them in CV preparations, for instance, in interview techniques, etc. And for those who prefer to go to self-employment, to start their own small businesses, the JBS service supports the youth in establishing their working groups. They may be 5 users or 10 users coming together to start this small business. So they help them in working their groups, that is Saving and Credit Association. Salam Tvet College has a very successful Saving and Credit Association of youth. So they also help in the legalization process of their new associations, in facilitating the working space. So here in Ethiopia, getting a working space is a very difficult task for those who want to start their small businesses. So this JBS, through this JBS service, the training institutions also facilitate this working space by connecting them with the government facilitators or government officers. So these are the major stakeholders. All have information and all needs the information. So so by doing this, what is the result that we have attained by implementing this intervention is that Salam Tvet College has aggressively implemented this approach, created links and connected the major actors, and attained amazing results, which means the skills training graduate youth employment rate raised to 86%. Meaning, when Salam trains about 100 trainees, about 90 of them get employed immediately after graduation. So some were employed at various industries and companies in wage employment, and some others become self-employed. They began their own small businesses. So they become employed, most of them, or more than 86% of them become employed in wage employment or self-employment. So what we have learned, or what our recommendation is, that training institutions should focus not only in equipping youth with technical skills. Yes, technical skill, equipping youth with technical skills is very important. This is the learning part. So it should be a demand-based technical skills. They should be based market demand technical skills, but they should also focus in labor market linkage and intermediation. Why? So as to maximizing the employment rate of Tvet graduates and to transfer the youth from learning to earning. So this should be the objective of the training institutions. It should not be left, or they should not focus not only on providing technical skills. They should try to transfer the youth from learning to earning. So that is how we can bring about change on the livelihood of the youth, on the living standard of improvement in the living standard of the youth, in the employability of the youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashinafi, for your presentation. And Mr. Ashinafi has given us a bit of a context in terms of the challenge that we are discussing today, the issue of a mismatch in terms of training and employment opportunities. And he presented to us just an overview of the job business service, which is an intermediary mechanism that they have used in their Tvet college to ensure that they have a linkage to the labor market, and that once they have trained their youth, that the youth are able to find employment opportunities. And not only that, also ensuring that the curriculum that is being used at their training institution is, of course, relevant for the needs of the market. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashinafi, for your presentation. I think it was very clear. And I realized that it seems that he was not sharing his screen with the presentation, but worry not, we will share it with all of the participants so that you're able to follow up on some of the points that he raised. Next on our panel, we have Mr. Dennis Muchiri, who is the Training and Operations Manager at CAP Youth Empowerment Institution in Kenya. Now, Mr. Muchiri is a community development practitioner with over 9 years of experience in supporting youth employability projects, and he has wide experience working with the private sector and holds an MBA in management as well as training in the development of CBET curriculum. Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. You have the floor. Please remember to share your screen with your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Hoping that all of you can hear me. I want us to talk about the partnerships for demand-driven skills development, especially from a training point of view. And the way I'm going to take us through this presentation is just to look at how we, CAP Youth Empowerment Institute, take this aspect of partnerships, because of course our training is demand-led. So welcome all of us, and please. Just a bit of what CAP Youth Empowerment Institute is. It's an NGO based here in Kenya with our head office here in Nairobi. And our vision is to ensure that we are an end-to-end community-based solution provider, especially for what we call the opportunity youth, or the not in education, employment, or training youth, so that at the end of the day, we impact employability skills to them so that we can increase their chances of accessing livelihood opportunities. The way we do this is we use what we call a basic employability skills training approach, which is a concoction or a combination of technical and vocational aspects of training, entrepreneurship, and life skills. This has been informed by the fact that you need to be an all-rounded sort of a graduate or an employee, employment seeker for you to survive in the world of work. So when we talk about partnerships here at CAP Youth Empowerment Institute, we divide them into three aspects. We have the pre-training aspects, of course, that requires partnerships. We have the during training aspects and the post-training aspects. When you're talking about the pre-training aspect, we are talking about the aspects that inform us of what the consumers of our products, that is the trained youth, would want to get from our products. So we of course partner with the private sector when we are conducting a training needs assessment. Remember, we are talking about a demand-led sort of an approach. So for a demand-led sort of an approach, you need first to understand what the market needs. How relevant will be your skills after training to the youths? How relevant will be the graduates to the potential employees? So we do that by conducting a market scan or a training needs assessment. And the key respondents during a training needs assessment is the private sector. So they identify to us the reasons as to why, despite the fact that we are having a lot of graduates out there, why are we still saying that maybe there are no jobs? When you're talking about the skills mismatch, what do we need to do so that at least we can match those skills that are relevant or that are in demand from the private sector and ensure that they are somewhere in our curriculum? So during this time, we identify what we call the occupational standards. And when identifying the occupational standards, the best people that can assist a training institution in identification of the occupational standards is the private sector again. So here we form what we call the Sector Skills Advisory Committee, which is a group or a committee of the subject matter experts in a specific field. Say, for example, if you want to develop a competency-based education and training curriculum for the hospitality training, you identify key stakeholders in that sector, you form them into a Sector Skills Advisory Committee. This is a Sector Skills Advisory Committee that will identify the occupational standards, and it's upon the occupational standards, or it's the occupational standards that form the framework of the curriculum. So they will assist you in coming up with that curriculum. So those are the two levels through which we partner with the private sector pre-training or before we start the training. Another key stakeholder during pre-training activities is, again, the government agencies. Here in the country, in Kenya, we talk about Tvet, which is a body that oversees all technical and vocational education and training institutions. And below that, we also have SIDA, which is the body that oversees the accreditation of curriculum as well as institutions that deal with competency-based education and training. So once you develop a demand-led curriculum, you invite SIDA, who again calls for a validation workshop. The validation workshop will be attended by the major stakeholders, one of them being the Sector Skills Advisory Committee and some other relevant people, so that at least they can poke holes in the already developed curriculum, so that at the end of the day, the curriculum will be answering into the gaps that were identified during the training needs assessment. The next aspect is the during training, and some of the key stakeholders during the training aspect is the private sector. The private sector plays a key role in a demand-led approach, because in most of the times, the demand-led approaches are more into hands-on skills. We all understand how expensive it is for one to set up a training center that gives, say, around 70 to 60% practical aspect that is required for any technical or vocational, technical and vocational education and training. So for us to leverage what we already have, we partner with the private sector. We partner with them where we invite the subject matter experts from the sector to come to our centers and offer lectures, some guest lectures. They co-facilitate with our instructors, because these are well-seasoned practitioners. Remember, we are talking about 60 to 70% practicals. And of course, a key aspect, the reason as to why we bring in these guest lecturers is also to bridge that gap so that we don't work as silos, the demand side and the supply side. We need to work together because we are in this together. Another aspect where we bring in the private sector is we talk to them so that they can allow our trainees, even during training, so they can have a feel of how the world of work is. And this is through what we call the field visits and exposure visits. It gives an opportunity for these youth during training to see how the different departments in a hotel coordinate with each other. You know, at the class, you're only talking about front office, you're only talking about, say, production and such like things. Let them go to the world of work. Let them go to a specific hotel so that they can see a typical kitchen, a typical chef. They can see a waitress, a waiter, and such like things, so that by the time they come back to the class, they have a clear picture of what the notes or what the facilitator or lecturer is trying to talk about. So you cannot do that without, again, partnering with the private sector. The private sector, again, we form what we call the business mentors network. We all understand that iron sharpens iron. And dealing with the youth, most of us have realized that these youth are very expectant. They want to graduate today and become managers of a 5-star hotel the following day. How do we manage those expectations? The way to only manage their expectations is by inviting well-seasoned people in the industry. Let them come talk to them. Let them tell them that, yes, after graduation, I started as a waiter, I started as a waitress. Then some 2 years down the line, after hard work, I got a promotion to where I am. So by the time you'll be, these youth will be graduating and you offer them an entry-level position, they'll still have that experience of the mentor that came to their class and told them that it's a progressive growth. You don't like graduate today and become a manager the following day. So by that, you've already managed their expectations. We also bring in business mentors in relation to life skills. We all understand the key aspects of what we call the skills of the 21st century. Let them come be trained on how to, of course, manage their expectations is one, how to set their goals, how to move into those goals so that there shall be a progressive growth once they move out of the training institution. Another way, we all know, when you're talking about demand-led approaches or the competency-based education and training approach, we are talking about assessment. And assessment means it's about what you are in a position to do. A competency-based education and training approach talks about skills, knowledge, and work behavior or worker behavior. Worker behavior in some other contexts, they call it life skills, right? So if you are to assess a skill, you have to invite a subject matter expert. So here at Cap Youth Empowerment Institute, before we release this youth to the world of work, we conduct a series of mock interviews for assessment. And these mock interviews are conducted in liaison with the private sector, so that at the end of the day, the private sector will give us a feedback of each of the individual trainee that we want to release to the world of work, so that we can iron out any gray areas before releasing them to the world of work. What that means is that if your partnership with the private sector is not very good, then you will invite them for, say, these mock interviews and they won't come. So it's very, very prudent, especially when we are talking about a demand-led sort of an approach. We are talking about a competency-based education and training approach to have this partnership with the subject matter expert, which of course comes from, say, either a consultant in the industry or even the world of work itself. And lastly, we're talking about the post-training aspect, the post-training partnerships that we have. We did the government for certification. Remember, we talked during my first session in the pre-training, we talked about the accreditation of our curriculum. So once a curriculum has been accredited, you expect the government agencies to give you the partnership, the certification. Another aspect is we also partner with the private sector because these are the consumers of your products, the consumers of your skilled manpower, the consumers of the youth that you've already trained. So you need that partnership with the private sector so that at least you can have a higher transition rate of from training to livelihood opportunities, be it, say, wage employment or self-employment, for internship opportunities, for for even self-employment, because again, if you partner with the financial institutions, for example, they can offer you, or they can offer the youth some say seed capital to boost their businesses. We normally encourage discourage our youth from getting or securing loans from financial institutions to start their businesses, but rather secure these loans from financial institutions to rather boost their businesses, so that at least we give you a chance to make a mistake and make it faster before starting getting some liabilities here and there. And lastly, of course, like I had mentioned, the private sector plays a role in ensuring that our trainees transition to the world of work. This has not happened without challenges. Of course, some of the government agencies are not very cooperative. You'll find that the private sector sometimes is demanding some compensation or recognition of some kind, some unavailability of some of the private sector, and of course the bureaucratic challenges that we have in most offices. But of course, there are solutions to that to ensure that you have a smooth ride, ensure that you have a very clear MOU or MOA with your partners for you to be in a position to manage their expectations at a very, very initial stages. Then you create a win-win for them. Everyone would love to work for you if they see that there's something that they're getting from the partnership. And also you avoid over-reliance of very few stakeholders. That means you diversify so that you can have as many stakeholders as possible. And most importantly, involve the decision makers when you're looking for a partnership, and avoid that aspect of only trying to forge a partnership when you're in need. Let the partnership understand that you are in this journey together, so that at least you can cultivate what I would call ownership. I think I've summarized my lessons learned, because for a demand-led approach, we need the government, we need the private sector, we need the community for a buy-in, we need other key stakeholders like religious leaders who are a key stakeholder in terms of mobilization and dissemination of information about your successes. And of course, it's good for us to always ensure that the partnerships are sustainable and scalable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for your presentation. I know 10 minutes was definitely not enough to get through all of the great work that you've done, and we're already seeing the participants commenting on your work in the chat, just congratulating you on the fantastic job that you've been doing. We'll be sharing the presentation so that you're able to follow through the notes that Dennis has shared. But what we're really seeing is the importance of including and having steady partnerships in the duration of all training, that it must start during training and after training. It's important to build those sustainable partnerships, and you've reflected to us the lessons that you've learned, and even the some of the solutions that you've come up, such as signing MOUs. I think these are important tips that our participants are probably gaining a lot of, that aha moment of how they can change how they're implementing their work to be more effective. Thank you so much, Dennis, for your presentation. And I think it's at this point where we move on to our next panelist who will be joining us, and that is Mrs. Madame Awa Ndiaye Sagna, who is the director at the Center for Port and Logistics Training in Senegal. Now, Madame Sagna is an engineer technologist in chemical engineering and in applied biology, and she has worked and directed at CFMPL since 2010, and before that she has worked as a trainer, as a consultant and auditor. So we welcome you, Madame Sagna. You have the floor. Please remember that we will be sharing your presentation on our side, and yes, please feel free.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to all. Because I lose My English stay a long time without practicing it. I would like to do my presentation in French. It's okay?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Là, permettez-moi de vous présenter rapidement le centre de formation que je dirige au Sénégal, le centre de formation aux métiers portières et à la logistique, qui est un modèle de partenariat public-privé réussi. Parce qu'au Sénégal, il y a 10 ans de cela et même avant, il y avait cette équation, adéquation, formation, emploi. Le secteur privé disait toujours que les jeunes qui sortaient des structures de formation, leur profil ne répondait pas à leurs besoins. Donc, il fallait résoudre ce problème. Et c'est pourquoi, à la demande, il y avait aussi des besoins non couverts par l'offre de formation au Sénégal. Et suite à une étude d'opportunité, l'État du Sénégal, avec son bailleur, l'Agence française de développement, a accepté de financer la création de ce centre que je dirige. Donc, si on va au slide suivant, on va voir comme statut juridique, ce centre est un partenariat public-privé, est un patrimoine public dans la mesure où c'est l'État qui l'a construit et équipé. Mais
Sorry, Madam, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I think the interpretation is not working. Can you give us just a minute to be sure that everyone can understand? Linda, can you confirm that the interpretation is coming through? It seems that the participants are not hearing. Linda? It is not working yet. Okay, and Linda seems to not be in the meeting. Linda? Okay. Linda, our IT, are you here, Linda, to support with the interpretation? Okay, I see that our interpretation. Okay, okay, so let me, I apologize, colleagues, for this challenge about the interpretation. As mentioned, we will try and get it fixed. And while we are trying to get it fixed, we will get our fourth panelist to speak because he will be speaking in English. And I hope that our participants will be able to hear the interpretation from Anthony. Diego, can you confirm to me that English to French is working and Portuguese?
Let me just start this. Thank you, everyone. And I'll move quite quickly. I know we're under time pressure. So I think that's similar to my colleagues that have been presenting before me. You know, we're all trying to tackle this issue of how we do demand-led Tvet interventions that are going to lead to enhanced employability. In South Africa, we face somewhat of a unique challenge. Obviously, we have very high unemployment, as all of you are quite aware, I'm sure, and that it's increasing significantly. And I think the biggest challenge for us is that our informal sector, which is a large part of our economy, is currently not creating jobs. We have very low employment levels in our informal economy, and that's part of our challenge because our informal economy in itself is quite large, but we're not creating jobs. So we're very reliant on our formal sector, and although we have a well-developed formal sector, it's actually relatively small compared to the size of our population, and unable, particularly in light of COVID, but even before COVID, given the economic situation in the country, it's unable to create sufficient jobs for the number of young people that are coming out of our schooling and education system every year. So we're looking for broader solutions that can be more inclusive and can enable broader access to opportunities for marginalized young people, but also for entrepreneurs that are operating outside of the formal economy. And that's a large focus of what we're doing here. I think the other key part to mention is that when we talk about installation, repair, and maintenance, we talk about it as a job family. It's quite a wide-ranging set of competencies and occupational roles that operate across the economy. And I'll talk to some of how we've conceptualized that, but we look at it largely in terms of the infrastructure value chain. And the infrastructure value chain cuts across your construction sector, your private property, your public infrastructure, your domestic, and others. And we try and conceptualize across those different buckets of demand where the opportunities are and how we can access those. So we have a 15-year strategy, the National Business Initiative. I haven't really introduced us. I mean, the time is a bit tight, but we are an NPO. We are a business-based organization, a membership-based organization. We work with many of our larger corporates in the country, both national and multinational, and play a kind of an intermediary role between corporates and government and other sectors of our society to create sustainable solutions around social and economic transformation and environmental transformation in our country. In this particular program, we have two broad objectives. One is how do we increase the demand for skills and jobs in SMEs? As I said, many of our SMEs are not creating jobs, particularly outside of the formal sector, but even those operating in the formal sector. So how do we incentivize and grow the demand for jobs? And I know that everyone has mentioned already how difficult it is for our Tvet system to train for the economy, to train for the labor market. Reality is that if the labor market is not creating employment, it's still very difficult for Tvets to be able to provide the right kinds of skills. So you have to work on the demand side to create conditions that will enable growth in employment opportunities. So we work on the basis that we need to create an effective support system to grow entrepreneurs. And we talk about, in this case, particularly IRM, or installation, repair, and maintenance, which are effectively your artisanal entrepreneurs, working with artisanal trades, a variety of artisanal trades, not necessarily qualified artisans per se, but working with using artisanal skills in a variety of different ways. And we then talk about how to create the kind of entrepreneurial ecosystems that will enable those entrepreneurs to innovate, to grow, to get on a growth path. And through that, we believe that we can then create increased demand for skills and for productive labor. We are in the process of establishing these enterprise and skills hubs, or what we call IRM hubs, at various Tvet colleges across the country to coordinate the support, so to facilitate this entrepreneurial ecosystem. So positioning Tvet colleges at the interface between supply and demand in those local communities in which we're operating, particularly our township communities and the township economy. And then how do we incentivize these entrepreneurs to upskill their workforce, to increase productivity, and take on Tvet students for work-based learning and employment? So how do we ensure that if we're working with entrepreneurs, that we can incentivize them sufficiently so they will take on young people as they're on a growth path? Then we also need to work on the supply side and increase the capacity of Tvet colleges to provide the kind of dual vocational skills training aligned to these skills demands of SMEs, providing pathways to trade qualifications. So outside of our formal apprenticeship system, which is relatively small, although significant, how do we provide alternative pathways through SMEs towards trade qualifications for both workers in SMEs as well as unemployed youth, looking at workplace behaviors, gender sensitivity, and entrepreneurship education. And I'll talk a bit more about those. we have three sort of strategic alignments, 3 areas of strategic alignment. As I mentioned, the one is infrastructure maintenance, because there's a lot of infrastructure across the country that's not being well maintained, be it in public or private or domestic, or even, you know, and it's or even industrial. And that for us offers a vast range of opportunities for young people to get and for SMEs to be you know, upskilled and to be supported to you know, to participate in the implementation of maintenance of infrastructure, the improvement of infrastructure. So how do we capitalize on that? The green economy and just transitions. Obviously, you know, if you're doing construction and maintenance, you need to make sure that you're doing it in the most sustainable way possible. We've seen how a lot of the houses that we built, low-cost houses that we built in this country, have fallen apart. We've seen with the recent floods in our coastal regions how, you know, infrastructure has collapsed because of you know, not just the buildings, but the land in which it's built, and whether the land is suited for building. So all of these sorts of things, and particularly with climate change, is going to become increasingly an issue. And then the use of energy or resource efficiency generally, when we're doing construction and maintenance, be it you know, resource, be it energy, be it water, be it waste efficiencies. And then finally, the focus on reindustrialization, and particularly at localization. So how do we work in local industrial areas? How do we position ourselves within local industrial areas to make sure that communities and youth are benefiting from investment in industrialization, particularly from a just energy transition point of view? And we believe that that we can position Tvet colleges, as I've indicated, at the heart of this entrepreneurial ecosystem, supporting SMEs to realize their growth objectives and access opportunities in the green economy, but then also responding to the demand for skills in those SMEs. We believe that with each SME that we work with, that we particularly SMEs that are not currently creating jobs, or even those that are creating small numbers of jobs, that we can create 2 new jobs per SME as we upskill young people and place them in those SMEs. So this is just a picture of how we're positioning our Tvet system. And we're using the vehicle of township hubs, as I indicated. We talk about them as IRM hubs. And they try and very much do this work between the interface between the SMEs on the one hand, the entrepreneurs on the one hand, and the youth on the other, both unemployed and employed youth, but, you know, employed in very precarious roles because they've never had any formal training. So how do we upskill youth, give them recognition for their skills? How do we enable unemployed youth to access these opportunities and make sure that we can create a match between the SMEs on the one hand and the youth on the other hand, and that we can then through that grow. Now, our hubs play a role of enabling us to reach larger numbers of entrepreneurs, larger number of youth within those township communities that we're operating. And these are the kinds of, on the demand side, these are the kinds of services that our enterprises get access to: networks for collaboration, incubation of new products, accessing relevant resources, to tools and equipment and information, access to new markets, to access to the support to build their capabilities to produce new products and services, their capabilities and competencies to manage their networks, their businesses, and then shared support services like admin and finance and IT and all of those sort of things. So we try and package this broad range of services within our hubs so they become mechanisms for growing those and supporting those SMEs, but also bringing them closer to the formal sector. So the whole purpose of the hubs is to be an intermediary themselves between the township business, the informal business, and the formal sector. And as we're bringing the informal business, the township business, closer to the formal sector, we're using the hubs as the mechanism to make them more visible, to link them to those opportunities, and then bringing the private sector closer to those businesses from the demand side through our networks of the the larger businesses that we work with. We have a delivery model around the skills that we're providing, both for unemployed youth and for workers. It's quite similar to what's been presented to date, except that we focus very much on packaging of skills that are much more, related to these particular SMEs that we're working with on the one hand, but also a very big focus on the green economy and new technologies that are emerging through the shift to the just transition, or what we hope will be a just transition. But as we shift into to a green economy, what are the opportunities that emerge? As I said, we also focus very much on work readiness behaviors for youth and entrepreneurship education, because we're hoping that through the youth that we're training and placing in SMEs, that we identify budding entrepreneurs, but those that have potential. And once they completed their training, we can bring them back to the hubs and we can take them into an incubation program. Other than that, it's very similar to some of the work that's already presented, but we are focusing on really fast tracking them as fast as possible into the labor market, while still making sure that they're getting recognized good quality skills and proper on-the-job training, structured on-the-job training, which leads to certification and recognition. And then, as I say, we can transition them into various sorts of ways. To do all of this, we have to work with a range of partners in this ecosystem, because we're trying to find a scalable solution, which means we need to work with national government, both on the supply and demand side, as well as the presidency through the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which is trying to facilitate integration of these different components. We need to work with our Small Enterprise Development Agency, brings the incentives for our SMEs, our Department of Trade and Industry, which unlocks opportunities in our industrial sectors. The Public Works, which obviously unlocks opportunities in public infrastructure. Then we have a range of ecosystem partners, intermediaries, industry associations, professional bodies, business chambers, government agencies, opportunity partners, which are companies, our government departments, NGOs, our delivery partners, which are Tvet colleges, our community training centers, private training providers, NGOs, and our funding partners, which is a mix of development partners, private sector through their procurement processes, because we have this unique situation in South Africa where we incentivize companies to procure Black-owned SMEs in particular as part of their Black economic empowerment incentives, and to grow those. So how do we link into those opportunities? Private sector also in terms of their CSI for funding unemployed youth and upskilling of young people, and then provincial and local government through their various funding mechanisms to grow skills and SMEs in both provincial and local government contexts. So quite a wide range of a big ecosystem of partners that we're trying to work with, because we're trying to find scalable solutions. We are not an implementation agency per se. We try to work, and although we are implementing because we have to approve the model, but largely playing this kind of ecosystem facilitation role, bringing these different partners together. To do that, we're setting up a program management office within NBI that's doing these four things. Unlocking demand, as I've mentioned, which is often what we call latent demand. It's not obvious. You need to do quite a bit of work with SMEs to make that demand visible, to bring it out. The credentialing, the incubation of new businesses, all of that on the demand side. On the supply side, working to match candidates effectively to workplaces, making sure that the curriculum is aligned to the demand and is agile enough to respond to demand, including work readiness and entrepreneurship education, and that Tvet and community colleges have the ability to deliver that curriculum, and that the workplace is effectively prepared to absorb that young person, to train them and absorb them. And we estimate that with an informal SME, it can take anything to up to a year to prepare that workplace effectively. So we'll work with the kind of early adopters, which will be your more formalized businesses that can train a lot quicker and employ a lot quicker. But with our informal businesses, as I've said, they haven't been training and employing before, so we need to prepare them effectively before we can place a young person there to be trained. We also have to do the work of unlocking the funding mechanisms, and those are, as I said, there's a variety of funding partners that we're working with. And then finally, on the ecosystem side, as I've said, working on the demand side with our SMEs, with our and various industry associations and etc. On the supply side, with our various training institutions, and then at the interface between the supply and demand, working with ecosystem partners who can help us to, to bring these two elements together, as well as through our IRM hubs, which will play that critical intermediary role. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr.
Very
Anthony.
rapidly.
I know, absolutely. 10 minutes is not enough to actually cover all of the work that you've done. And thank you very much for your presentation. We're really hearing a lot of unique elements of your implementation, the focus on the SMEs, which is quite crucial, and the fact that you are partnering for scale. Thank you very much, Dr. Anthony. And now we're going to move on to our last panelist, who unfortunately we were disrupted a bit by the interpretation, and sincere apologies for that. And we're hoping that it's working now. Madame Sagna, would you like to again take the floor? I will switch on my camera to indicate time. We might be running a bit late, but we'll be able to manage this well. Madame Sagna, are you still with us?
Oui, oui, je suis bien là. Je suis bien là avec vous.
Thank you.
Okay. C'est bon?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Ok, donc, ok. Bon, désolé, hein, comme vous tous. Là, je m'en vais vous présenter le centre sectoriel de formation aux métiers portiers et à logistique de Dakar, qui est un modèle de partenariat public-privé et réussi. Donc, ce centre a été créé à la demande des professionnels du secteur portier, transport, logistique, parce que l'offre de formation au Sénégal ne couvrait pas toutes leurs demandes, mais même pour les offres couvertes, il y avait ce problème d'adéquation formation-emploi. Et donc, après une étude d'opportunité, l'État du Sénégal a accepté de construire ce centre et de l'équiper grâce au bailleur, l'Agence française de développement. C'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, ce centre est un patrimoine public dans la mesure où c'est l'État qui a construit et équipé, mais qui dispose d'une autonomie de gestion administrative, financière et à travers une convention de délégation signée entre l'État du Sénégal et l'Association des professionnels du secteur portière, transport et logistique. Cet partenariat se traduit par, au niveau de la gouvernance, par le centre est dirigé par un conseil d'administration qui est une instance partenariale composée de 12 membres, dont 6 membres du secteur privé, 4 membres du secteur public, c'est-à-dire l'État, à travers 4 ministères, le ministère de tutelle, formation professionnelle, le ministère des Finances, le ministère du Travail et le ministère des Transports, infrastructures. Et au niveau du secteur privé, nous avons le port, le Conseil sénégalais des chargeurs, le syndicat des manutentionnaires et des auxiliaires du transport, de même que l'Agence nationale des affaires maritimes. Il y a aussi les représentants des travailleurs du secteur qui sont représentés par les 2 bureaux de docker. Donc, voilà comment se traduit ce partenariat en termes de gouvernance. En termes de financement aussi, c'est l'État qui achète la formation des jeunes qui rentrent ici par voie de concours co-organisé avec la direction des examens et concours et le centre. Mais ils achètent la formation à 90%. Les 10% doivent être supportés par les jeunes et sa famille, ce qu'on appelle les ménages. Et ça représente le tiers de notre budget. Les 2 tiers proviennent de l'achat par les entreprises des séminaires de renforcement de capacité ou autres services. Donc, l'État finance à travers une inscription budgétaire, donne la subvention d'équilibre parce que pour les 3 premières années de montée en puissance, il fallait une subvention d'équilibre. Les recettes n'étaient pas suffisantes pour supporter toutes les charges. Mais aussi, ils peuvent donner des fonds exceptionnels pour des besoins non couverts à la demande de l'association. L'Agence française de développement aussi qui ont financé le projet, mais qui peuvent aussi donner des subventions exceptionnelles aux besoins. Et les entreprises aussi qui peuvent faire des dons, des legs et même faire des subventions de fonctionnement. L'autre particularité du centre par rapport au personnel, c'est le centre qui recrute directement son personnel, aussi bien administratif que formateur, et ils ont directement des contrats privés. Mais aussi l'État, toujours à la demande de l'association, peut mettre à disposition des formateurs, mais pour des modules d'enseignement général. Et on a les professionnels qui assurent la présence des jurys d'examen de certification, mais aussi qui peuvent libérer certains de leurs agents pour donner des cours. Et en termes de domaine de compétences, nous avons des filières de formation qui durent 2 ans, et il y en a 6 filières que vous voyez sur le tableau, réparties en 3 niveaux. Niveau 3e BPC, juste avant le bac, 3 ans avant le bac. Niveau classe de terminale, c'est les techniciens spécialisés, et après bac, c'est les techniciens supérieurs. Et depuis 2016, on a eu à travailler avec la Banque mondiale et l'AFD pour sortir des formations courte durée parce que la demande était importante, et avec le rythme des 2 ans, on avait du mal à couvrir. Et c'est là qu'on a eu des formations de courte durée allant de 3 à 6 mois pour donner des compétences à des jeunes pour leur permettre d'être employables rapidement. Et maintenant, pour les formations continues, il y a des séminaires à la carte proposés par le centre sous forme de catalogue sur mesure. Donc, on écoute le besoin de l'entreprise, on apporte une réponse, mais aussi des services. Voilà pour nos offres. Maintenant, les tableaux qui suivent, on peut passer à l'autre slide. On peut passer à l'autre slide, s'il vous plaît. Voilà, là, ça donne juste une idée sur l'effectif formé depuis le démarrage du centre en termes de formation initiale, c'est-à-dire des jeunes demandeurs d'emploi. En forme de formation continue cours du soir, ça c'est toujours des formations diplômantes, mais exclusivement réservées aux professionnels dans le cadre de la validation des acquis et de l'expérience, mais aussi dans le cadre d'une reconversion. Et maintenant, en termes de renforcement de capacité, ce que vous avez au séminaire, c'est tout ce qu'on a renforcé au niveau des entreprises. Donc, vous voyez un peu les ratios. On est au total à 8608 professionnels renforcés, 1400 jeunes demandeurs d'emploi formés en initial sur les 2 ans et 425 professionnels diplômés en cours du soir. L'autre slide. L'autre slide qui suit, c'est ces formations courte durée qui ont démarré, comme je l'ai dit, en 2016. Et vous voyez aussi le nombre de formés, 1039 juste en 3 ans, 4 ans de formation. Et même avec ça, on a du mal à satisfaire la demande. On n'est qu'à 25% de satisfaction des demandes reçues et ceux qui ont été formés. L'autre slide. C'est juste résumé les débuts des activités 2011, mais surtout les clients. On travaille aujourd'hui avec 139 entreprises et avec aussi quelques entreprises qui sont dans 5 pays de la sous-région, notamment Maïs Mauritanie, comment j'ai encore, JPA, port de Gambie. On travaille aussi avec le Congo, Brazza avec Ilox, Satram, Gabon et aussi le Niger récemment. Et aujourd'hui, notre taux d'insertion qui est mesuré tous les 6 mois, on est à 76,61% de stagiaires certifiés qui sont insérés. Et lors des concours d'entrée aussi, on a 1500 à 3000 candidats pour juste 64 places. Maintenant, les problèmes rencontrés et les défis, ça c'est le slide qui suit. Voilà, on a, comme c'est tout nouveau au Sénégal, c'était cette expérience partenariat public-privé dans la formation. Donc, il y a un problème d'interprétation des textes qui nous pose un problème de statut fiscal du centre. Là, il y a une étude qui avait été faite et financée par l'Agence française de développement, mais dont les recommandations ne sont pas toujours appliquées. Et là, ça nous expose à des amendes fiscales, puisqu'il y a un problème d'interprétation des textes. Le centre aussi ne peut pas se permettre de faire des mobilisations de fonds. Par exemple, on peut avoir des marchés, mais on n'arrive pas à faire recourir à des mécanismes d'équilibre ou de levée de fonds du niveau des banques. Notre statut actuel ne le permet pas. Et ça aussi, ça freine un peu certains projets que nous avons. Nous avons aussi un problème de capacité d'accueil. Aujourd'hui, vous voyez avec les statistiques d'avant qu'on a beaucoup de demandes qu'on n'arrive pas à satisfaire. Et on a fait un projet d'extension depuis et on attend juste le financement, soit par l'État ou ses bailleurs ou par même les professionnels du secteur. Et l'autre chose, c'est aujourd'hui cette formation certifiante des cadres du secteur. Et l'objectif, c'est peut-être de nouer un partenariat avec les universités pour une reconnaissance des titres et correspondances dans le système LMD, c'est-à-dire licence, master, doctorat. Et l'autre perspective et challenge, c'est de s'ouvrir à l'international en proposant nos services d'assistance technique, puisque quand même, c'est une expérience de plus de 10 ans qui est réussie. Et aujourd'hui, avec l'approche programme, beaucoup de pays veulent mettre en place ce système de partenariat public-privé dans la formation professionnelle, avec la mise en place aussi d'un institut pédagogique qui nous permet de développer rapidement beaucoup de programmes de formation pour répondre toujours aux besoins du secteur avec l'évolution technologique et tout. Donc, voilà un peu ce qu'on fait. Et l'autre slide montre un peu la clientèle d'entreprise avec qui nous travaillons, qui ne se limite pas seulement au secteur portuaire, mais tout le secteur industriel, parce que la logistique est partout, ce qui nous permet, surtout nos offres de formation, à savoir le niveau conduite, parce qu'on est le premier centre, je ne dis même pas au Sénégal, mais dans l'Afrique subsaharienne, qui forme des conducteurs d'engins, des conducteurs routiers. La demande est tellement forte et ça existe dans toutes les entreprises de production et de distribution. Pareil aussi, tout ce qui est gestion de stock, l'entreposage et tout. Ce qui nous permet aujourd'hui de s'ouvrir à tout le secteur industriel. Donc, voilà plus ou moins ce que je voulais donner. Ce partenariat public-privé a permis vraiment de résoudre cette faramineuse adéquation emploi et formation, dans la mesure où c'est les professionnels qui définissent leurs besoins. On organise le concours pour former et c'est eux-mêmes qui président les jurys de certification, d'examen pour dire si le jeune est valable ou pas. Et c'est eux aussi qui les accueillent en stage, en entreprise, qui représentent le tiers du volume de formation. Et l'approche aussi utilisée, c'est l'approche par les compétences. On part du métier. pour identifier tous les besoins en compétences et établir le programme de formation en fonction de cela. Voilà un peu ce qu'on est en train de faire depuis le début et qui montre ses fruits. Et aujourd'hui, on a même des projets de commencer à avoir des antennes là où il y a des ports qui sont développés au Sénégal pour se rapprocher plus encore de la population. Donc, merci, j'espère que je n'ai pas été trop long. Donc, je suis là aussi prête à répondre à d'éventuelles questions, s'il y en a. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Madam Sagna, for your presentation. I tried to speak a bit of French there and hopefully learn more. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your presentation. And thank you, participants, for your understanding as we were trying to figure out the interpretation challenges. But now we will take a short health break. And after the health break, we will then open we will first get a presentation from GDI regarding the research around partnerships. And then we will open the floor for discussions. We've already seen in the chat function and even in the Q&A, some questions have been shared with us. We will be picking those up and sharing those during our in-conversation. Our break will be 10 minutes long, which means that we will be back here at 11:37. And I think we will just adjust according to the time zones, but the break will be 10 minutes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in a few. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is 11:38, 10 minutes later, and our health break has ended. If we can just have an indication in the chat, colleagues, are we back and ready to continue with the agenda? I hope you managed to grab your coffee and stay energized for the last leg of this webinar. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with our agenda and our next presentation. I mean, first, it's really to acknowledge and to highlight the fact that the chat has been really engaging and we have seen a lot of connections being made. And this is really the reason why we did this webinar. We organized it so that you would be able to connect and learn from each other. So you have already gone ahead of us in terms of the objective of this webinar, and we really encourage that to continue. Let the conversation continue beyond today. Thank you very much. We really celebrate and acknowledge that. Now we've fully acknowledge the questions that are in the Q&A, and we will speak to them in a few. But first, we will welcome our colleagues from Global Development Incubator, who will be represented by Mr. Stephen, and he is the Senior Associate at GDI. So we will welcome him to make a presentation and about what has been becoming evident in research when it comes to demand-based partnerships. Mr. Stephen, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to some. Maybe if I can just get a confirmation that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. And just also to confirm that I am giving you 10 minutes. I hope you'll be
Yes,
able to complete it all. Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely. I don't have much because a lot has been shared that connects to what I'm about to share. So my name is Stanley Mwangi-Gichobi, Senior Associate with Global Development Incubator, and my background is in strategy, design thinking, and this is why I'm happy to have taken part in this process. Global Development Incubator is an international nonprofit focused on toughest global challenges and looking at different ways that we can tackle these challenges, and especially around poverty. And one of the ways that we believe we can attack this is through creating meaningful livelihood opportunities for youth through our program called the Global Opportunity Youth Network. The Global Opportunity Youth Network is passionate on understanding some of the challenges and potential pathways that we can create. And among our learnings, a key area that we found that is critical is in what we call Tvet reform. And part of Tvet reform absolutely is around the conversations we are having. How do we connect the supply side to the demand side for optimal output? Now, based on that, we've been working together, of course, with the ASPI team and the GIZ team in understanding how can we forge a framework for public-private partnership, and especially on how Tvet can engage the public sector in vocation training. We were doing this, some key insights and that we got from talking to different stakeholders across Africa, from the interviews we did, review of materials. There were a number of challenges that needed to be addressed. First of all, how do you localize these particular interventions? Of course, we do have the bigger approach from national level, but if you are to achieve success, we need to really localize needs within a specific territory and not maybe at a national level or at an African level. Even it's actually most probably to the smallest unit here in Kenya. We'll call that a sub-county or a county government. To others, it's a province or a district. The next thing is there's a challenge of autonomy, and especially in decision making around how to build these mechanisms on curriculum, on training, and so forth. And if we are to achieve significant change, this is a challenge that needs to be addressed, and autonomy at the vocational training level is encouraged. Here, managers are able to make critical decisions. Also, there's challenges around coordination between blocks and sectors, and Tvet will need to approach it differently and coordinate a little bit better and more strategically. Of course, regionalization is a big thing, and we have these regions that come together based on some things that align within a same region, creating a same understanding, and then adopting an application unique for each country would be a challenge that we need to address. And of course, there's the aspect of sustainability beyond just the reform. How do we make sure the reforms are sustained? And yes, this calls for political, institutional dialogue, a little bit of policy, a little bit of more engagement with other stakeholders to ensure sustainability. So these are some of early insights while we were trying to understand the challenges and what would guide us insights even as we approach to build these tools and processes. Now, after we talked with people, went through a bunch of documents, interviews, reviewed best practices, we analyzed that for us to have a consideration within the Tvet system that provide a lever for change, things that if done, the Tvets themselves will flip the odds are for. So Tvets need to score well in strategic and operations planning. This is around design, implementation, ability to analyze the private sector and identify strategic themes and things that will work well for them. Number 2 is curriculum and training, and how to work with the private sector to build a more demand-driven intervention or a demand-driven approach to training and ideas like work-based learning. But even more than that is the ability to analyze data and use this data to inform how the curriculum is designed, how a work-based product is designed, and so forth. The third one is institutional capacity, and this is building the capacity of the Tvets to come up with innovative business models. You know, for example, how do you have a cost-share agreement? And we've seen some cases in the ratios, in Capita, in Boma Hotel here, where this actually work. How then do you establish internal controls and advocate for greater autonomy for programming within the local and the national governments? And how do you align this? That the capacity to deliver that will be critical. The fourth one is around the stakeholder management. And how do you build the capacity of the personnel to actually engage in the private sector? So this would result in things like better training, a profiling system during intake, you know, regular intake with alumni in the job market, getting feedback, but in addition to constant connection with the private sector. So these are the 4 things. I don't want to spend a lot of time in them because I know we will simulate the conversations later. But the idea here is to shift Tvet to a more strategic positioning that is in tune with the territory or the location, and then the ability to create what works for them at that particular location is the most important things. We do understand that different regions would have different realities. So we are not saying this tool is an absolute, but it's a good beginning where Tvet can actually pick this and then think about how they can customize it to what works better for them and given the realities that they have at that particular point in time. Actually, my overview was very short, and I'll have to stop there if there's any questions, comments, or feedback.
Thank you very much, Stanley, for your presentation. I think you have provided quite a clear overview of the research, and you've made mention of the tool, which we will be launching in a few minutes. But perhaps let's jump into the conversation. We have in our program a slot that says in conversation, and this is where we will be engaging with our audience more and allowing them to ask some questions. And perhaps before we take some questions with regards to your presentation, we want to take a bit of a step back to hear if there's any questions that were directly shared to our panelists, questions that our audience would like to share directly to our panelists to clarify their methodology, to clarify the approach. I think this would be the best place to start. And while our participants are thinking and bustling up the courage to raise up their hands, I will start with some of the questions that have been shared in our Q&A section. And there was one from Hubeshet Terefe, who asked this question when Mr. Ashinafi was making his presentation. And the question is, first, appreciation. She says, thanks for the presentation. May I ask what trainings are you providing at your Tvet? So this question is to Mr. Ashinafi, just clarifying exactly which trainings are you providing at Salam Tvet. So we'll start with that one and allow Mr. Ashinafi to just respond to that one while we look at the other questions. Mr. Ashinafi?
Yes.
If you are still with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very much. In Salam TVT College, about training is given in about 10 training areas. The college tries to make them market-oriented, market-based training. So mainly on manufacturing, electricity, electronics, garment making, the hospitality, hotel and food preparation, ICT, and the other, there are some other parts like urban agriculture, and so on. So these are some of the training areas. Furniture making is another one. So these are some of the training areas. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. I was on mute. I was just saying that there is another question that was just speaking to a request that there be a WhatsApp group for information sharing. And to this, I would say that we have the Aspire Forum that is exactly made for this purpose of information sharing. So our team is going to share the link to the Aspire Forum, and it's quite easy. In just 3 steps, you can create your profile and you can begin to ask some questions that you may have about either this discussion or any other issue that is coming up in the field. So I hope that is fine, Tembelihle, that you'll be able to create your account there and for knowledge sharing purposes. Another question that we had was during Mr. Dennis' presentation, and it was from Pascalino. It reads, when you mention the private sector, are you referring to the companies in the formal economy? And what about the informal economy and the many companies? How is this related to your activities, or how are your activities related to initiatives to formalize economy and skills? Mr. Dennis, would you be available to speak to this question?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So I just want to mention that when you talk about the private sector, we're talking about both the formal and the informal sort of sector. Remember, when we're talking about competency-based education and training, there's what we call the recognition of prior learning. When you talk about recognition of prior learning, this of course is what we call here in Kenya the jua kali sector, or what we understand all of us as the informal sector. So I know the Tvet Act of 2013 is trying to formalize all this as a country, Kenya. We are still, there are strides already that have already been brought on board so as to ensure that we are formalizing even what we call the informal sector. But the bottom line is to ensure that skills have been recognized, as in it's about what you can be in a position to do as opposed to what you know. So once that is done, I know it will be possible for the people in that informal sector to be in a position to be recognized through a certificate of competence. But when we are working with the private sector as CAP Youth Empowerment Institute, we work with everyone, be it formal or informal. Thank you. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dennis. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Anthony will have to leave us in the next 5 minutes. And it's just to check from our participants if there's any specific questions to Dr. Anthony, or any form of communication that you would like to send through to him. We really appreciate, Dr. Anthony, your being able to attend this webinar, and we'll just take the next 4 minutes to check with our participants if there's any question directed at you or any comment. I am not able to see any hands, but I hope the colleagues will help me out to identify these. Okay, so I am not seeing any hands or indications from our colleagues. So I just want to take this moment to... Yes.
There was a hand. Somebody put their hand up and now down. Oh, Comfort. And Amjad. Those are the two hands.
Aha, okay. Comfort, would you like to take the floor if you still have the question? I'm not sure if you have the capacity to switch on your mic, if you can maybe confirm with us. Hello? Okay, I'm not getting Comfort, but I see Amjad's hand is up. Would you like to ask your question, Amjad?
Bonjour, bonjour tout le monde. Vous m'entendez?
Welcome.
D'abord, je remercie
Yes.
tous les panélistes, voilà, la qualité de leur présentation. Ma question, c'est au fait par rapport à l'employabilité. L'employabilité, si on veut la maîtriser, et donc il y a lieu de maîtriser deux aires. La première, c'est la relation avec les professionnels, avec le milieu économique. La deuxième, c'est la capacité pédagogique et didactique pour pouvoir construire les compétences telles qu'elles sont définies au départ auprès des jeunes pour que les résultats d'apprentissage soient les plus proches par rapport aux postes déjà définis. Ma question, c'est à la fois, c'est d'ordre un peu empirique par rapport à la présentation de ma collègue Awas, par rapport au partenariat public-privé, et également par rapport à la présentation en matière de recherche. En fait, le partenariat, s'il est comment dirais-je, il s'inscrit beaucoup plus dans une logique purement économique, c'est-à-dire là où il faudrait avoir un partenariat public-privé. Et là, il y a une forte participation des professionnels. Ça, c'est un premier modèle très capitalistique. Mais il y a un deuxième modèle, qui s'inscrit beaucoup plus dans la négociation sociale. Donc, il y a un contrat social, il y a une négociation avec tous les partenaires, les services publics, les acteurs sociaux, les acteurs économiques. Donc là, le service en charge de la formation devrait être en mesure de répondre aux besoins du monde économique. Donc, en fait, il y a deux modèles, donc, et chacun il a ses atouts et ses inconvénients. Mais par rapport au modèle tel qu'il fonctionne au Sénégal, je voudrais savoir quel est l'impact en termes d'efficacité et de rendement par rapport à la satisfaction des professionnels du moment qu'ils sont vraiment dans la gouvernance directe de l'établissement de formation professionnelle. Et merci.
Thank you, Amjad. And I believe this question is to Madame Sagna. Would you like to take the floor?
Allô?
Yes,
Oui.
we can hear you.
Ok, j'ai bien entendu la question de M. Abjek. aujourd'hui, le degré de satisfaction des professionnels se mesure aujourd'hui par déjà le taux d'insertion, parce que c'est eux qui recrutent les jeunes. Et comme je dis, c'est eux qui sont à la base de tout. C'est eux qui identifient leurs besoins. Quand le centre recrute et forme, c'est eux aussi qui viennent certifier les jeunes. Et ils sont très satisfaits de ces jeunes qu'ils ont recrutés. D'ailleurs, même on commence à avoir même des dons venant de ce secteur privé qui nous donnent du matériel pour la formation et qui même donnent des subventions de fonctionnement. Aujourd'hui, j'ai signé 4 conventions de délégation, 4 conventions de partenariat avec des entreprises du secteur qui donnent des subventions de fonctionnement pour le centre. Et avec même un autre port qui va se construire au Sénégal, le directeur général du port a demandé, et la semaine dernière, on a signé un protocole avec les collectivités locales, les mairies de la zone, pour avoir une antenne de ce centre là-bas pour former dans les métiers, parce qu'en plus du port, il y aura toute une zone industrielle. Et je pense que si les professionnels n'étaient pas satisfaits des produits du centre et des formations du centre même qui sont prodiguées directement à leurs professionnels en activité, je pense que tous ces projets-là ne seront pas, ne seront pas en place ou même penser à faire ce travail. Ils devront peut-être chercher d'autres alternatives. Donc, moi, je pense aujourd'hui, mesurer le niveau de satisfaction de mes entreprises du secteur, des professionnels, c'est par le taux d'insertion des jeunes demandeurs d'emploi, mais aussi par l'accroissement des clients qui viennent chaque fois et qui reviennent parce qu'on a eu à faire des renforcements de capacité pour leurs professionnels en activité. Voilà. Je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à la question de M. Abjek.
Thank you, Madam. We can just get a confirmation from our respondent to the questions. Maybe you can just share in the chat if Madam Sagna has been able to adequately respond to your question. I believe we also had a hand from Henny. If the question is still available. And I'm not sure if Anthony, I think Dr. Anthony has already left us, but please take the floor with your question. Okay, we are not getting a response from Henny. Perhaps Comfort, you would like to take the floor? I'm not sure if Comfort is able to speak, but perhaps while we're waiting for Comfort to raise a question, there is a question in the Q&A by Mr. Frank, and the question is there a role for trade unions in skills development, and how? And I can open the floor to our panelists, any of the panelists who'd like to respond to this question. Is there a role for trade unions in skills development?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to take that question.
Thank you.
When we were developing the tools, one of the things is that we were looking at who are some of the critical stakeholders. And absolutely, unions are for a number of reasons. One, they are important in design of the curriculum in terms of what it would require for the person to attain what we call a dignified job. In most of the communities we are in, the challenge is once the youth have graduated, they don't have proper understanding of what dignified work should look like. And when they go to the market, they often are very vulnerable to either getting very poor pay or being abused and not having a clear understanding of what the right expectations should be. So in terms of work preparedness, or what we'd call work readiness skills, the unions themselves firstly can give critical insight on what those skills would be in aspects like safeguarding for the young people and also understanding. However, in addition to that role, trade unions also provide insights that can be like industry insights within a particular ecosystem. Different organizations or different sectors would have different trade unions, and this can be a good source of information on understanding what are the employment trends, what's actually changing, where are people losing opportunities and where are people getting opportunities. And this is very important data, especially when you're thinking about designing around demand. So that's our perspective and part of the learnings from our work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stanley, for that, and just reiterating that there definitely is a role for trade unions in skills development, and thank you for providing that overview for us. And we encourage participants, if you are struggling with your connection or you can't seem to be able to speak, we encourage you to include your questions in the chat, and we'll be able to respond to them, or even to the Q&A. Now, next question, we'll ask Mr. Eric Sile to help us with the question. He shared this question for Madam Satna. And perhaps, Eric, if you're able to unmute, would you be able to share the question with us so that Madam Satna can respond as well? Eric, are you able to unmute and speak? Okay, I think Eric is unable to share his comments, but let's look through the chat again for some additional comments that are being made and questions that are being brought forward. There is a question from Raveen, which speaks to the skills requirements of the informal sector remains a challenge. Is there any suggestion for this? So let me repeat that. The skills requirements of the informal sector remains a challenge. Is there any suggestions for this, please? Dr. Anthony has spoken to the informal sector, but perhaps we can, and I think he's not in the call anymore, but we can open this question to Stanley or one of our panelists to speak to the informal sector. Thank you.
Yeah, I also don't mind taking that one. And I'll connect it to some of the lessons we were picking in the handbooks. And one of the things was, what is the definition of a sector? Of course, we have the bigger sector, and when you're looking at it from a perspective of businesses, how do you actually categorize different businesses? So one category is what people call the informal. We prefer to call it like livelihood sector, and these are usually small businesses, kiosks, maybe not fully registered or compliant with given registrations requirement. Perhaps some even have just a basic, like in Kenya, just a basic permit, and that still feels the informal sector. Characteristics are not consistent work opportunity, waged work opportunities for people, so they don't employ for long term, it's on daily wages and so forth. The truth is that in particular, places, and especially in most developing countries that Africa falls, most of African countries falls into, the informal sector actually accounts for a majority of the workforce. These sectors do have specific skills that they need and do wish to have good skills that they can actually integrate into their workforce. So what we've done in other pieces, even as you're trying to understand the entrepreneurs and what they need, is that actually people categorized in the informal sectors would actually have demands for specific skills. So if I'm a plumber and I'm not registered, but I'm doing my gigs, I do actually need a plumber who will support me and maybe will be under apprenticeship for a period of time before the person launches their own practice, if I'm an electrician and so forth. And talking to these people also gives you an indicator of what skills they actually look for. In one example here in Mombasa, you'd hear things like, we would actually prefer what we call soft skills or employability skills better than even technical skills, because for me, attitude is better. And based on what I do, the student is able to see and learn quickly. So they're very rational about what they'd want in terms of a workforce. There are big segments that provide very big opportunities for people that are actually graduating with different skills. And yes, there are part of stakeholders that we should be engaging in part of organization, because they'll give data and insights onto either growth of industry in addition to skills needs and where to invest in terms of skilling so that we can meet this demand.
Thank you so much, Stanley, for responding to that question. And we swiftly move to one of our other questions as well. Our participant is asking, many companies find it difficult to sign MOUs, especially with private institutions. Kindly share some techniques to overcome this. And this question was directed to Dr. Anthony, but I think Mr. Dennis Muchiri would be able to speak to this, because as one of the interventions, they had mentioned the importance of signing MOUs. Mr. Dennis, are you able to reflect with us some of the techniques to help overcome the difficulty in signing MOUs with private institutions?
Great. Thank you very much for that question. So like I mentioned, we have to create a win-win for all of us. Sometimes the reason is why the private sector is reluctant or they resist to sign MOAs or MOUs with partners is because sometimes they feel like we just go to them when we are in a problem. So how about integrating them from the onset of our approaches till the end, so that there can be that ownership? Like, for example, I mentioned that before we engage any sort of a partnership, we involve them from our first step, which is a training needs assessment. We also involve them during the training, and we also involve them at the end of our post-training support. So with as such, it means that they are feeling part of the system. They are feeling part of the program. Also, there are some initiatives that you take to appreciate them. For example, when we conduct what we call a sector meeting or a sectoral meeting, say, for example, it's for hospitality, we issue them with certificate of recognition. They feel very much appreciated. When we are doing sort of some presentations somewhere, or we are printing some brochures that we disseminate to our communications, we ask them whether it's possible for us to even use their logos. So when we when we use their logos in our publications, it assists them in visibility. They become visible. Say, for example, wherever we go to dish out these brochures having a logo of a certain hotel, a logo of a certain, say, MVM industry, they feel like we are assisting them in even visibility. So that means that we are not only going to them for them to assist us in, say, job placements, internships, or even coming as mentors, but we are also taking a deliberate deliberate action to ensure that they are part of even our conversation. They are visible. Wherever we are going, we are carrying them. So those are some of the interventions that we can use to entice the private sector to partner with us, to entice them in even signing MOUs and MOAs with ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. And you've heard the answer is incentives, 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 and the importance of including the private sector from the onset of conversations. And thank you, Mr. Dennis, for responding to that question. So we have some other questions in the Q&A, and some of them have been written in French, and we're just working on getting them translated so that I am able to read them out. But just to add that there has been a question regarding the sharing of this conversation, and we will definitely be sharing the link to the recording as well as all of the presentations to all the participants. Now, while we're trying to get interpretation of the French questions that were shared in the Q&A, I'd like to maybe give the floor back to Stanley, who is going to launch for us the handbook for Tvet managers in building partnerships. And this is a handbook that we've worked together in the CIFA project to try and get a resource that can be useful to practitioners on the ground in terms of how they can build and sustain partnerships for demand-driven skills development. So let me hand over to Stanley, if that is fine, and then we will go back to a few more questions after his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I was trying to share that in a minute. I'll also post the link to access the document online. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Hello, Stanley. Are you already speaking or? Okay.
Yes, I was sharing.
Okay.
I've managed to access setting up the Zoom. So I will provide an overview of the document quickly. Then I'll just take you through the specific sections that we have of the document. Allow me to scroll back from the beginning. This was work that was done together with team and partners from CIFA and the colleagues. And what we've done with this handbook is that we've organized it into 6 sections. Of course, the first section is an introduction, understanding what constitutes demand responsive Tvet ecosystem, understanding the role that Tvet and other players in the ecosystem play, then looking at the standards set for that, and then seeing how to score and evaluate yourself and how to use that information moving forward. So that's how the book is organized. So after that, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 key things that emerged when we were talking to demand responsive for Tvet. These 4 things that are very critical. One is strategic and operations planning. The next one is curriculum and training, stakeholder management, institutional capacity and structure. And just a quick overview, strategy and planning, it's around how the Tvet is aligned and its ability to strategically engage other stakeholders, how to do reform the curriculum so that it's more demand driven, how to constructively engage stakeholders to get critical information, buy-in, and other forms of partnership, and how to build an internal capacity to deliver on this. So that's how the handbook is structured. When you explore the handbook, you see we have added a little bit more outline of information under each of the 4 key themes. We have further sub-topics. So strategies about market assessment, curriculum is about design, delivery, and approaches like workplace learning. Stakeholder management is around management and monitoring and evaluation. Institutional capacities about financial sustainability and governance. On the bottom left, we have a criteria that explains what the different symbols are from. So for example, if you take a small dot, this would be an issue to address demand responsiveness. If you take the triangle, it's a point where the public or private Tvet can address. If you take the last one, it's around the role of government and how government can contribute. So this sort of map is a guide onto what and who should do what. And we use this as a criteria for scoring. Now, quickly on this next page, on my left, you can see the criteria that I'm going to quickly explain, and then I'll connect that to what we have on the right. So on the left, rating score, we've organized key assessments according to the 4 strategic areas that we are looking at. With the one circle being a list score, and the 5 circles being a very high score. So what a manager will do is go through each sections and then ask themselves questions pertaining the components on each. So for example, if you are completely aligned and from a sort of a checklist perspective, everything is in place, you'd get a score of 5. But if that is not available, or even you're at very early stage, that will be a score of 1. A good example would be a question here where we are asking if, for example, you've ever reviewed your curriculum in the last 5 years. So if that hasn't happened, then you would score 1. And that will be an indicator on where you are. And that is a good feedback to things that you may want to look at. So that's across the different 4 strategic areas. Now, the total of this score is 40. And if among these you score a 30 and above, then you are really doing well. But that doesn't mean it's absolute and there's no room for improvement, but it just paints a very good picture of your Tvet. You know, like the way people talk about organizational health, maybe demand responsiveness health in this context. So once you score, you will come and aggregate, and you'll get all points that pertain strategic and operational planning here. Then you'll have all points that pertain curriculum and training here, same as stakeholder management, institutional capacity. Then you'd have a sum. The sum is just a general indicator. What is more important is area by area analysis. So you can score very well on strategic and operations planning, but then you do very poorly maybe on curriculum and training. Though the good score here might elevate your general score, what's important is not to forget to actually look at the individual area where you are having a very low score, and then using that as a lever to formulate strategy or conversation within your organization. After the assessment, we've dug deeper to provide guidelines on effective private sector partnerships by understanding what, why, and how. We've documented a number of case studies that we've seen as best practices along different areas, like identifying and through how to prioritize partners, understanding hiring requirements, how to offer relevant courses. And there's a lot of resource and best practice examples on people who've really done this well, and a good illustration on how this can be implemented and why you should be thinking about this. So that's how we've organized the book, and then we've shared, of course, our resources and references, but that's just a snapshot of the handbook. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much for providing that snapshot of our tool, our handbook that has been developed to assist Tvet managers in strengthening their partnerships for demand-driven skills development. So I think we can take a few more minutes to take some questions as well to the tool, or any other questions that we could not get to. And to just remind our attendees that this tool is not set in stone, which means that we want to hear from you. If you've been able to use the tool, give us some feedback. Is it working the way that we think that it should work in the field? Give us some feedback. As a project, we're quite open to responding to the needs that are rising from those who implement the instructions and the steps in the handbook. Let me check. Let's see if there's any questions or comments to this handbook. As Zarina has said, this handbook is available on Aspire, and this is the platform that we mentioned in the beginning of the session, and the link has already been shared. We have it available in English and in French. So let me take a moment to see if there's any questions specifically about this tool before we wrap up our in-conversation. And I think the colleagues can also help me to identify if there are any hands that I am missing. Okay. Are there any hands? No hands at all? Okay, excellent. I think then perhaps we can, no hands. Thank you so much, Zarina. Thank you to Stanley for the presentation of the research and also the launching the handbook for us. And perhaps we can move on with our program now that we don't have any questions. Oh, there is one hand. Of course, we will not close you out. Amjad, would you like to take the floor and ask a question? We have a minute for you. Amjad?
Intervenir. Oui, rebonjour.
Yes, please go ahead.
Vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez?
Yes, we can. I can hear you.
Ok. En fait, c'est une partie de la première question que je voudrais reposer encore à notre collègue, à notre animateur. C'est dans le cadre de la recherche. C'est-à-dire, la question est la suivante. Est-ce que vous avez pu un peu creuser dans le domaine du partenariat pour un peu ressortir ou bien départager entre le modèle classique qui s'opère actuellement dans la plupart des pays au titre de la gouvernance de la régulation de l'offre de compétences et le modèle de partenariat public-privé. Du moment que le premier s'inscrit beaucoup plus, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, dans une logique d'une négociation sociale entre tous les partenaires, et chacun de son côté pourrait fournir la contribution qui lui colle par rapport à sa posture et son statut. Et le deuxième modèle, c'est carrément, on est dans une logique de balancer carrément la gouvernance ou bien le pilotage d'établissements de formation entre les mains des professionnels. Donc, c'est ça ma question. Je ne sais pas ce que c'est elle est claire ou nécessite-t-elle d'autres précisions? Voilà, et merci.
Sorry about that, Amjad. Thank you. Perhaps you can just clarify just in one line for us the question. I think I am struggling to hear the interpretation.
Ok. Bon, la question, elle est un peu délicate parce qu'elle n'a pas encore fait l'objet d'une recherche et d'une littérature assez poussée. C'est-à-dire que ce que je voudrais savoir, de par les travaux de recherche de notre collègue, c'est la différence en termes d'atouts et d'inconvénients entre la gestion déléguée avec les professionnels. Donc ça, c'est une tendance qu'on est en train de l'avoir un peu étendue dans pas mal des pays et dans pas mal d'établissements de formation professionnelle. Et le deuxième modèle, c'est le modèle de base classique, c'est la gestion actuelle, où les services publics, c'est eux qui pilotent directement l'établissement de formation, tout en ayant l'ouverture requise par rapport aux besoins des professionnels. Voilà, donc la différence entre ces deux modèles-là.
Thank you, Mr. Amjad. And I think your question was perhaps referring to the study that has been done by our colleagues at GDI. Stanley, are you able to provide some comments or a reflection on the question being posed by Mr. Amjad?
Absolutely. I didn't get it quite well. Are you able to paraphrase for me?
I think he was speaking to the, I think he's speaking to the role of the private sector in terms of leading the training of within Tvet institution. The difference between the two models, the training being led by private sector versus the training being led by your social organizations or by NGOs. I think this is the question that he's asking. Thank you. I am not hearing Stanley. I don't know if it's just me. Hello, Kichobi. Can I have an indication in the chat if it's perhaps just me that is experiencing some challenges? I'm no longer hearing Kichobi. If we can just have an indication in the chat. Okay, all right. So I think we might have lost Mr. Kichobi for a few seconds, and perhaps what we can suggest is Mr. Kichobi would respond to Mr. Amjad's question directly in the Q&A so that we're able to move on with the rest of our agenda. Yeah, we'll wait for Mr. Stanley to indicate in the chat when he's back. But I think we can go into our wrap up and next step. And just before we do that, it's just to appreciate our colleagues for all of the questions that you have raised. The Q&A has been really has been really active, and we've been able to hear many voices coming out from our audience. And I think there is just one hand. Is it still Mr. Amjet's hand that is up? This is what I'm seeing on my side. I think if it's still Mr. Amjet, then we would allow for Stanley. Okay, it's Jean. Jean, you have your hand up. I would give you the last minute so that we are able to conclude our in-conversation. Mr. Jean, are you able to make your inputs? Okay, I think Mr. Jean might be struggling a bit with accessing the audio. We cannot hear him yet. So I think just to wrap up, this session is to say that really the purpose of this conversation is not for it to end in this webinar, but we really want to continue the conversation through our Aspire Forum. As I mentioned, we want to create a space where our audience and our practitioners are able to engage in a free and in an open space. And this is really a call for us to do that. And the team will share again the link to the Aspire Forum so that we are able to engage even further. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think because of our time, we will move into the next and into towards the end of the session. Can you just confirm that you can still hear me? I see someone in the chat saying they cannot hear. Okay. I will continue unless I get... Okay, great. Thank you. So just a confirmation that they can hear us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to a conclusion of this meeting, we will just do one more exciting activity, which is called evaluating this event. And I think we all love filling out evaluation forms. So the team is going to share on the chat just a link that you can click to help us evaluate the session. It's literally clicking and just adding your inputs, because we're really keen to know if this event has been helpful in any way to you. And just to hear your feedback. So I'm just going to check in the chat if it has been shared. Thank you, dear Ho. We've shared the link to our evaluation. It's very simple, a few questions just to help us get an idea of your thoughts about the session. Mr. Gichobi, thank you and welcome back. Glad to see that you're back. Our colleagues are just doing evaluation, but we can open the floor for you to definitely address the question that was asked while we are waiting for our colleagues to complete the evaluation form. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, and apology for that.
No
I
problem.
think electricity problems everywhere, sometimes unannounced, but I'm really happy to be here again. So as I was mentioning, we've seen models where the private sector have actually built institutions, training institutions already, and they see this as a big lever to access to quality skills, where they are able to have direct control on what skills they need and how they're training it. It's common. Toyota Academy would want to train their own mechanics that they absorb. In Mombasa, where we are, we have Tvet registered under big industries like Mabati Rollings. Big hotels also have their Tvet sites. So yes, indeed, the private sector can actually lead the reform. The challenge is that most of them they look a lot on inward skills placements, and very rare cases they will do externals and do very well. But they actually lead the training. The other model is where, like the one we're discussing, where TVETs are actually engaging the private sector. So if I'm thinking in terms of scalability, then the Tvet leading the conversation creates a better path. Because one, it will have the opportunity to offer diverse and meet diverse needs based on the range of courses they can offer on different areas of expertise. This would be very different. For example, if I go to one of a Tvet and an organization called the BOMA Training Institute under the BOMA Hotel, they would often look at hospitality skills and they are able to place within that. But when it comes to other areas, they don't score very well. They will not score very well in health. They will not score very well in, other technicals like plumbing and so forth. But TVETs do have the capacity to deliver multiple courses at the same time and engage different stakeholders at the same time to create this opportunity for young people. So if you're thinking scalability, then TVETs should actually lead the conversations. We do know the private sector interests change over time. Sometimes it even falls off. So whereas it's a good model, scalability becomes hard. And if the incentive is not very clear in terms of they can't actually find skills at all, most of the time either they would prefer to work with partners. The in-house is as a response to lack of proper access to high quality skills. So it's a response to that. It's never been, in very many cases, it's never been a strategy from the word go. It's usually a response to a gap. So even in theory, what this means is if the TVETs can deliver and meet this response, then the partners would prefer that model as opposed to investing heavily in building skills internally, which is quite expensive. Young people sometimes leave and they spend so much money, and then it creates a cause of frustration. So that's our sense from what we're learning, both as a community and from the stakeholders we engaged. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hitobi, for being able to respond to the question by Mr. Ajmat. And we just make a call and remind us that we're still available for any other questions or reflections through the Aspire Forum, or even through sending an email to us at aspire@nepad.org. Just to check on the floor if we've been able to complete our evaluation. I trust it didn't take very long. And as I'm saying that, I see that there is another hand by Hassan. If you can, Hassan, ask your question in a minute as we are drawing to a close. Hassan, are you there? Okay, I think Hassan is not able to speak. Please feel free, Hassan, to share your question in the Q&A, and we will pick this up and see how we are able to foster a response from our panelists or the GDI team. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for completing the evaluation form, and thank you to the panelists for your time and even responding to the questions that have been raised. We are now at the end of our webinar, and it wouldn't be the end if we do not have closing remarks. And for this, we're going to welcome Mr. Nicholas Uma, who is working under the Department of Education, Innovation, Technology, and Science at the AUC Commission, and he's working as a senior youth advisor. Mr. Nicholas Uma, thank you very much for staying with us in the duration of the call. You have the floor for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zipo. I want to join you in thanking all the participants for being with us throughout this session. Special thanks also to the presenters who have given the valuable presentations on partnerships for demand-driven skills development. The value of good practice is to draw from knowledge and experience of other practitioners. And I believe that we are all richer from the experiences that have been shared with us. From when we started with the first panelists from Salam, and I want to borrow one sentence that he mentioned, and he talked about labor market linkage and intermediation. I believe that through this engagement, we will be able to enhance our intermediation opportunities wherever we interface. Most importantly, also, how do we incentivize, inspire, motivate, and mobilize the private sector for its active engagement in skills training and employment? This is a question that ZIPO has encouraged us to continue reflecting on through the Aspire portal. We are hopeful that through this engagement, we are hopeful that the glow from our spotlight of the promising practices will radiate far and wide, and also encourage significant positive change towards demand-driven skills development and employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. And also that we will be encouraged to develop a learning culture. The biggest drive and change is through learning from each other, adapting, collaboration, and partnerships, and also through the various communities of practice. Lastly, we also seek not to leave anyone behind, and let's see mechanisms through which we also engage with others in fragile countries and contexts, enhance gender opportunities, and even persons living with disability. With all that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we have benefited from the engagement that we've had, and I want to encourage you all to continuously engage with us through the Aspire portal. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas. I would not say or add anything else. Thank you for joining us today, and good day to all our participants.
Thank you to all. Have a lovely day.